Hello, friends. The UN Secretary General has warned about the danger of the war expanding in the Middle East, which will have consequences for the entire world. On the other hand, it is also reported that Donald Trump has begun direct preparations for World War III. And now we will discuss all of this together and go through specific facts that you can compare yourself and draw your own conclusions. Because I remind you that I always try to present materials in such a way that you get the information and draw your own conclusions using your head and critical thinking. Because today there is a huge amount of information on the internet and all of it needs to be filtered, analyzed, and you need to draw your own conclusions. In order not to become victims of propaganda and not to fall for, let's say, someone else's provocations, manipulations, schemes, and so on. So enjoy watching, subscribe, like, and be sure to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. So, the UN Secretary General has warned about the danger of the war expanding in the Middle East, which will have consequences for the whole world. Antonio Guterres stated that the war in the Middle East has entered its second month, and the suffering of civilians, destruction, and threats to regional and global stability are getting worse every day. Let me remind you that, in principle, according to the very first statements by Trump and in general the United States, this war should have already ended with a total and convincing victory by the United States. But so far, we only see that the United States of America is actually losing this war because they have not achieved any of their goals. They seem to be trying to attack Iran. It seems like Iran is still blocking the Hormuz Strait. It seems like 2/3 of their missile stockpiles remain untouched. And we see that neither Israel nor the United States is able to reach them. At the same time, compared to other countries that are losing money now, Iran is losing just pennies. At the same time, the United States, Israel, the Gulf countries, and Europe are losing billions every day because of this war. This means that Iran can keep fighting, it can fight for another 10 years, and it will only make things worse and worse for the civilized world. For the countries of Europe, for the United States, for the Gulf countries, the situation will only get worse for them with each passing day. In fact, the UN Secretary General called on the US and Israel to stop the war and on Iran to stop attacking its neighbors. Guterres also issued a warning. The blockade of the Hormuz Strait will raise prices for food and energy, which will hit the poorest countries in the world. Basically, I don't think Iran is very concerned about this because Iran has repeatedly said that if the US fulfills all our conditions, we will open the Hormuz Strait. The US said that they will not do this and that they will open the strait themselves very soon and very quickly, but we see that there have already been many such promises. Then Trump said that if Europe needs it, they should open the Hormuz Strait themselves. Then he said again that they would open it, and in fact it's back and forth, neither open nor close. Although there are some interesting facts that suggest they are unlikely to succeed in doing this, but we'll talk about that a little later. What else does the UN Secretary General say? We are on the brink of a wider war that will engulf the entire Middle East and have dramatic consequences for the whole world. Guterres added that diplomatic efforts are underway to find a peaceful solution. And he announced that he has sent his personal envoy, Jean Arnaud, to the region to support these efforts. Although we understand that it is unlikely he will resolve anything by being there. Because to resolve such an issue, you probably need to work either in the United States or in Israel. Or even better, in both places. And after that we can talk about something. But what happens is that Europe, the UN, and the Gulf countries are calling for an end to the war, while Trump keeps saying they've already won, Iran is already destroyed, there's nothing left of Iran. And he just ignores the reality that is actually unfolding. Now, actually, the next interesting thing is that the US is preparing for World War III. Trump plans to increase the military budget to a record $1.5 trillion next year. $1.5 trillion. The world has never seen anything like this before. Just imagine, $1.5 trillion per year. Do you know how much that is? If the war in Ukraine ended today, even if the Russians withdrew all their troops to the 1991 borders, and we would have to rebuild both Donbass, the Azov Sea coast, and Crimea. If we had to rebuild everything, then $1.5 trillion would be an even bigger amount. No, than the damage currently inflicted on Ukraine. That is, over all the years of the war, Ukraine has not suffered material losses amounting to $1.5 trillion. And just imagine if such a budget was invested in Ukraine, I don't know, for 234 years, Ukraine would simply turn into Singapore. Do you understand? That is, it's $1.5 trillion. I don't even know how many cities you could build from scratch with that. Build new modern cities and give them away. Free housing for citizens. And we see that instead of supporting their own people, their own nation, to create better conditions for them, Russia, the United States of America, and other countries are ready to spend trillions on war just to achieve their own geopolitical interests. And at the same time, they tighten the screws on their own citizens because, as they say, it's not the right time. What is this actually about? Trump said today that the US could easily unblock the Strait of Hormuz and seize Iranian oil. But at the same time, something doesn't add up, because if it were that easy, they probably would have done it already. Amid these statements, Western media say Trump, despite talking about negotiations, has ordered preparations for a ground operation against Iran. The US has informed Japan that their order for the delivery of approximately 400 Tomahawk missiles by March 2028 will not be fulfilled on time due to their significant use in the war against Iran and the need to replenish their own stockpiles. Active preparations for a possible conflict with China are also underway. However, we see that if the United States of America plans to fight China the way they are fighting Iran, that's very bad news. Not only for the United States, but for the entire democratic world. Unfortunately. Next, the United States, together with its NATO allies, is preparing for major exercises. For example, the exercises that are scheduled to take place in 2026, that is, already this year, where they will be testing the responsibility for the use of artificial intelligence and drones. At the same time, scenarios of a possible war with Russia in 2026 and 2027 are being discussed. This is being discussed, in fact, from the European side. Because we remember that after Ukraine, Europe is the next one who could become the next target. The target of Russia for expanding its aggression. And we have already said more than once that it's not even necessary for the Russians to finish their war in Ukraine. They can simply allocate and mobilize additional troops in Ukraine, go on the defensive, and cause chaos, for example, by opening a second front. At the same time, in Ukraine, for example, they will just dig in and hold their positions, and Ukraine will be forced to keep its troops there. And on the other hand, some relatively small groups of troops can be moved to the NATO borders and start causing trouble there as well, or even carry out some limited military operations. So, that's the situation we have. In my opinion, it's very, very unpleasant. What do you think about this? Write in the comments. It will be very interesting to read your thoughts. I wish everyone a good day. See you.